सॉरी आप म्यूट हो गई हैं.
Hello everyone, a warm welcome to Center for Geographical Studies, Aryabhat Knowledge University Campus, Patna. Thank you very much for joining this webinar today. My name is Singh and I am a webinar facilitator and PhD scholar in CGS Patna. And we are very pleased to bring you this content today, which is the 17th base lecture series in CGS, Aryabhat Knowledge University, Patna. Good afternoon, Director Ma'am, Rajiv Ranjan Thakur Sir, eminent speaker of the day, scholars and all invitees present here. I, on behalf of the center, welcome Rajiv Thakur Sir, Associate Professor of Geography, Department of Geosciences, Missouri State University, West Plains, Missouri, USA. His research interest includes urban and regional, economic development and planning, geography of research and development, human dimensions of global climate change, and higher education strategic planning and management. He has a wide teaching experience of more than 18 years and served in several universities, namely Missouri State University West Plains, University of Tennessee Knoxville, University of South Alabama Mobile, and many more. He is a prolific writer, author, edited, and contributed in writing more than 20 chapters in different books. He has been a member of several associations, namely National Associations of Geographers India, Indian Science Congress Associations, Asian Urban Research Associations are some of them. Today, Rajiv sir is going to deliver a lecture on the topic Knowledge, Economy, Labor Market and Spatial Science, Challenges and Opportunities for Bihar. But before we start, a couple of technical details. If you have any questions, please type them in the inbox message. So we will try to get at least some of them through the speaker after we talk. So now I would request our director, ma'am, Professor Poornima Shekhar Singh, to speak a few words to inaugurate our webinar series. Ma'am, now the floor is all yours.
It's a matter of great pride for CGS to have Rajiv Thakur from State University of Missouri with us in this August gathering as a speaker. It's a great opportunity to hear him on a very contemporary issue towards which the whole world's economy is oriented, but still at large, our thought process is not bearing its acknowledgement. We have to adapt with the changing time as the surge of globalization is very strong, which is inevitably grinding us into its mill. Just to give an insight into the topic, the term knowledge economy was popularized by famed business management consultant Peter Drucker, first in his 1966 book, The Effective Executive, and then further in his 1969 book, The Age of Discontinuity. Drucker was well ahead of his time with his emphasis on knowledge, skills, data analysis, and measurable performance, and strategic management by objectives, MBO. The modern economy is known as the post-industrial economy or the information economy, reference to the central importance of information technology in the economies of developed nations. In the new knowledge economy, the most valuable assets that a company owns are often intangible assets such as patents, copyrights, or proprietary software or processes. It is in contrast to previous economic epochs, the industrial economy, where the manufacturing plants and equipments are key assets for most of the business, or in the previous agrarian economy, where land was usually the primary asset. The knowledge economy both supports and is fueled by innovation, research, and rapid technological advancement. The overwhelming majority of workers in this economy are extremely computer literate and skilled at creating business and financial models. There is an increasing emphasis on data collection and analysis and on the development of algorithms and artificial intelligence. In this backdrop, I hand over the floor to Rajiv Thakur. Thank you so much. And Rajiv ji, please continue with your lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Poornima Singh. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Rajiv sir, you are mute.
Sorry. I just realized I did not do the technological thing. I will start over again. Dr. Poornima Singh, thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful warm welcome and the introduction. I also thank all the distinguished geographers who are around or who might be joining shortly, my geographer colleagues from Patna and elsewhere, and of course, students and guests. This is a very, very humbling moment for me. Whenever
आवाज नहीं मिल पा रही है सर, आपका
आवाज नहीं आ रही है. अच्छा, I am on maximum volume, and can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's very clear.
Okay, awesome. Very good. Thank you. So I was saying that I'm very humbled by
सर आप लोगों का आवाज कम मिल पा रहा है सर. हेलो सर.
Okay.
सर, आपका आवाज कम मिल रहा है.
Let me see what we can do about that. Let me work on that.
Switch off. Everybody, please switch off your microphone so that he is audible. Please.
Okay, can you hear me at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay, thank you. I am going to share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Can you see my PowerPoint screen? Okay, just a second. Let me do that. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Awesome, very good. Well, as you know, it takes a few moments of iterative process for the technology to begin working. I hope everyone can hear me. Just one yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome, very good. So when I was asked by Professor Poornima Singh to deliver a talk to the Center for Geographical Studies at Aryabhat Knowledge University, she did not realize how happy I was, because deep down, I wanted to share my own thoughts on the subject that we are going to be listening, and I would be sharing my thoughts with. Knowledge economy, labor market, and spatial science, challenges and opportunities for Bihar, is a subject that will literally go from one end of the spectrum to the other. It will go from global to local. It will go from Bihar to the United States and everywhere in between. The idea of labor market is going to be embedded in the notion of knowledge economy. And you will find that there will be tremendous amount of interconnections, interdependence, and interrelations that will be built up, that will be brought out through several examples. I will discuss and talk about the attributes of knowledge economy, the spatial dynamics of knowledge economy, and as Professor Poornima Singh rightly said, the concept is not something very new. Peter Drucker talked about it in the 60s. Since then, the notion of knowledge economy has been evolving with contributions of not just economic geographers, but regional scientists, other social scientists, those who belong to the field of management at large, those who belong to the discipline of information technology at large. And so, as I think through all of this, I wanted to somewhere bring about a linkage in terms of challenges and opportunities for Bihar before I could conclude. But it's a serious subject to talk about, knowledge economy. Knowledge, very vague sometimes, and of course economy, both can become very vague. But at the same time, I wanted to insert a little bit of humor and a little bit of ease in understanding all of this. On the screen on the left-hand side, you see a cartoon. An older woman is throwing away cookies in the garbage. Perhaps the computer told her to discard the cookies. I'm sure all of us who use computers come across such terms like, manage your cookies. Of course, the elder lady took it literally. On the right-hand side, you will see lots of icons which have become popular these days. If you are on the computer for any number of reasons, and if you are a regular user of information technology, these icons are familiar icons and you are familiar with its meaning. In fact, your children and grandchildren are born with all these ideas. And if I may say, when Professor Poornima Singh was visiting the United States, perhaps, or when she was using the computer for the first time, I'm sure she must have had some moments of humor and moments in which she might have thought that, what is all this? This question, what is all this, is not a new question. It happened to me when 20 years ago I arrived in the US and I was exposed to a wide variety of technology. It happens to anybody. Let me take a step back and share with you. My father is a geographer, my mother is a housewife. My father does not know how to handle a cell phone, he doesn't know how to handle computer. Such can be the difference between a highly literate geographer and his housewife who has no exposure to formal institutions and knowledge, and she knows how to handle a smartphone. She does all my father's communication needs. I'm only giving this example to encourage anybody who thinks that technology is beyond their reach. And technology is a very small part of the landscape of knowledge economy that we are going to discuss shortly. Technology is an important part, but technology is not the only aspect of knowledge economy. On your screen, you see a triangle, and within the triangle, there are 4 other triangles. The idea was not to confuse you, but the idea was to bring the interconnections and the role of interconnections, interactions, and independence as we think and talk about knowledge economy. Before I go any further, and I will be coming back to all these ideas of interconnections at the level of a scale, which means from the neighborhood scale to your city, to your state, to your district, to your region, to your country, and of course, at large, the globe. In terms of interdependence, whatever happens at the local level is no longer simply local. The local is very highly connected with the global. And there will be several examples, case studies that I will be sharing with you. Today's knowledge economy is so much about interaction. It's about sharing. It's about collaboration. And in that sense, it is different from its predecessor, the idea of a resource-based economy. So we can't just talk about knowledge economy as knowledge economy. We have to understand what was happening before this and how old is knowledge-based economy? What was happening before this? Is resource-based economy over, or is it still continuing? Before I go any further, I want to quickly talk about 2 things. One is, when we think about resource-based economy, the time period is very, very wide. Some scholars, some economists, some geographers, some social scientists, they think, or they talk about resource-based economy, and they only go as far back as the Industrial Revolution 1757, or the 1750s, broadly speaking. But if you actually look at resource-based economies, they have a history which is far long. And if you try to understand technology from the perspective of a wheel and many other tools that evolved in civilization, then resource-based economy has a history of its own. If any one of you have had a chance to look at a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, you perhaps will understand what I'm talking about. But in more recent times, in the last 300 years, last 150 years, last 50 years or 100 years, we have associated resource-based economy with mechanized mass production or mass production for mass consumption. In other words, industrial economy, by and large. As opposed to that industrial economy, now we are fast moving. Well, at least the rest of the world is moving. And we will deconstruct and find out, between my talk and the question and answer session, whether we have already moved into knowledge-based economy landscape in India, in Bihar, or not. That's a big question mark. I'm not coming with any assumptions, but rather a number of open-ended, flexible questions. The idea of mechanized mass production is definitely associated in the Western world, in Europe and North America, with the whole idea of mechanization, the whole idea of industrial revolution and everything that that was associated with, the coming of transportation systems such as the railways. On the other hand, a knowledge-based economy, its rudimentary beginnings started in the 1950s, late 50s and 60s. And to give you a sense, it is of course associated with the growth of capitalism. Post-World War II saw a time period when the Western world, under the leadership of the United States, was constantly moving forward with its industrial production system. And this industrial production system, in some loose terms, you can associate it with the scientific management process or the assembly line technique system, where the whole idea was produce more and throw the products into the market, and the market will take care of the pricing mechanism or the demand and supply. And that is how, in the Western world, particularly United States, Canada, many European countries, Northwestern European countries, they all excelled in mass production, whether it was steel plants, whether it was automobile industry, or many others. And of course, a little later, Japan also joined this bandwagon. In fact, Japan's success was largely because of the open arm invitation that the United States gave as a trade-off, for having control on the defense and security in the Pacific sector. And of course, the then President of the United States told the Japanese premier, by golly, do whatever you want to do, don't become a communist country. We will buy your products. So Japan started growing. This is all the story, the narrative of resource-based economy. And we haven't yet entered knowledge-based. Knowledge-based comes about sometime in the 1970s. But a quick input on what happened in the 60s and 70s. The comfort zone in which the United States was settling itself, and European countries were also finding themselves as growing back again. Rebuilding process was happening. What also happened was there was competition. Competition that the United States began to face from the Japanese in the US, and of course, capitalism by nature faces competition constantly. That's the intrinsic nature of capitalism. We also know that capitalism by nature is competitive. It only moves forward with the idea of innovation. And we'll talk about innovation in greater detail as we move forward. And the idea of reinvention is also intrinsic to capitalism. But the mid-60s to late 60s saw a couple of things happening in the world, which influenced in a very, very large way how the economy was going to function in the United States, in Canada, in Northwestern Europe. There were a lot of protest movements. Within the US, the industrial economy, which was focused in the Midwest, in places such as Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, in the state of Missouri, and everywhere in between, there was an intrinsic problem in capitalism between labor and capital. The labor wanted more price for its labor, but the capital did not want to share that. there was a tension between labor and capital. While that was one thing happening, there was also another thing going on. Cost of raw materials was also spiking up. Oil, petroleum, which is a very important ingredient in any production process, now became suddenly very expensive thanks to the Arab crisis, the oil crisis that happened in the early 70s. Not only that, there was a civil rights movement that happened in the US in the 1965, 66, 67 that caused a kind of a jerk. And all of this can be broadly understood as major protest movements that was going on. And they started challenging the golden economy of the United States, which existed in the 50s and the 60s. Now they were shaken. Now they were being jerked. Now they were nudged left, right, center, forward. It is in this context, one more thing happened, the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was a big blow to the United States economy. It was a war that it lost. It was actually morally a war that the entire Western world lost. And they haven't yet been able to get out of that. But that's a different story for another time. I will stay focused at our discussion of the knowledge-based economy. As we move forward, we move into this transition zone where mechanized mass production system was causing concern in the economy. Now by producing more, you were not necessarily profiting more. In fact, it was the other way around. And so, creative, innovative methods had to come into place, and knowledge-based economic system took its birth with the theoretical ideas of folks like Peter Drucker and many others. Geographers joined the bandwagon much later on to understand the importance of all this. But the idea of flexible production system is a very important idea. Flexible production system essentially, in a nutshell, is saying that you cannot move with the traditional idea of producing a lot in terms of economies of scale and throwing it in the market and expecting that the market itself will give you more profit. That's not the way it works. Please understand that my lecture, my conversation with you is very, very down to earth. There is no attempt to use sophisticated terminology. If at all, I will break it up. Even as we try to understand knowledge-based economy, it's important to pay attention to this pyramid that you have on the screen. There are two pyramids. One with a wider base at the bottom, and the other with a narrow base. But the pyramid, the way it has been presented to you, has meaning in itself. On the left-hand side, the pyramid is an example of what a typical economy, a developing country economy looks like, which is more resource-based, including economy in India or in Bihar or anywhere in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Asia. But the pyramid that you see on the right-hand side, which is an upside-down pyramid, is typically knowledge-based. This is the manner in which economies have been evolving in the last 4 decades or 5 decades, which is knowledge-based. And I will take a few minutes to not just deconstruct these pyramids, but also talk about what I mean when I say zero sum on the left-hand side and what I mean by positive sum. In the resource-based economy, there is an assumption that factors of production has to be owned by somebody. Let's take one example, land. A piece of land can only be owned by one person at a time. There can't be multiple owners. In other words, there is a zero-sum game. What belongs to me cannot belong to you. Or what belongs to Gaurav cannot belong to Prerna. So it's a zero-sum situation that natural resources can only belong to a corporation or an individual. And while it belongs to one corporation, it cannot belong to somebody else. That's a zero-sum game situation from development economists, game theorists' point of view. On the other side, you see the knowledge-based economy pyramid, which is upside down. And we talk about knowledge-based economy in terms of positive sum game. Professor Poornima Singh's knowledge, understanding, is not an exclusive belonging to her, or anyone's knowledge is not an exclusivity to that person. Knowledge can belong to multiple people at the same time. And hence, we talk about knowledge-based economy not in terms of competition. Well, yes, there is market-based competition, but not a competition where it can only be owned by one person at a time. It can be owned by multiple people. And hence, the idea is positive sum game. There are many good things about knowledge-based economy and the landscape in comparison to a resource-based economy and landscape. Let me further explain what you see on the left-hand side of the pyramid. You see at the bottom is primary sector, manufacturing sector, the tertiary sector, and then finally the quaternary sector. In a typical resource-based economy, say in Ghana or Ecuador in Latin America or India or Myanmar, what you find is that primary sector, fishing, agriculture, forestry, they have a prominence, they have an importance in terms of what they contribute to the economy. In that logic, we move to the next step, manufacturing. Manufacturing may not be a very dominant part, but it plays a role. Tertiary sector, on the other hand, which we also understand as service sector, tends to have a little bit of a role in developing countries, but it can vary. If you're in a place like India, tertiary sector or service sector is fast growing. But if you're in next door Nepal, much of the population is still dependent upon primary sector. If you're in Bhutan, similar experiences. But if you're in Bangladesh, manufacturing sector is growing like anything. So different countries are on different timelines. And the quaternary sector, typically in a developing economy, is a very small part of the tertiary sector, even though it's outside the quaternary sector. We know manufacturing is all about the ability to use tools, the ability to have industries, factories, and so on and so forth. Tertiary sector, of course, on the other hand, is about services. Banking, retail, finance, education, medical, you name it. It's all part of the tertiary sector. But the quaternary sector is a sector that has been evolving as part of the knowledge-based landscape over the last 4 to 5 decades. This quaternary sector is a new sector. And people who belong to this sector are people who are very highly skilled. Their skills are far above and beyond the tertiary sector folks. Examples. A tertiary sector can include a doctor, a teacher, a professor, a lawyer. But a quaternary sector involves those individuals who have these skills to create services that are going to be used by the tertiary sector folks. So what are these people going to be doing? And what do they do? In the quaternary sector, we find people who are software designers, biotechnologists, people who work in the wide landscape of research and development, people who work in sophisticated areas such as advertising, legal services of a very different order. And in a short while, I will be talking about all of this in a different mode, how and where in terms of the scale you find these people located. Developed economies, such as the United States or Canada, or even Singapore, Tokyo, Hong Kong's, advanced capitalist nations of the world, where knowledge-based economy, that landscape is fast evolving. Quaternary sector is now becoming a dominant part of their economy, more dominant than the tertiary services. So where is tertiary or service sector in these countries going? They are going to other countries. They have already left the shores of these advanced capitalist economies. They have gone to other countries. In the context of India, and India's position is certainly a little bit unique. We have jumped manyfold in respect of the quaternary sector. Our information technology, biotechnology, is fairly advanced when compared to other developing countries in the world, such as Brazil, such as Mexico. I don't think it's a good idea to compare India in this sense with China. China has leapfrogged its way up beyond. But if you look at advanced capitalist countries in the world, while folks are moving the ladder on knowledge-based economy, from primary to manufacturing to tertiary to quaternary, primary sector itself, as part of the total economy, the workforce that participates in primary sector has reduced. It's barely 5%. So 5% of 320 million, which constitutes US population, or 5% of Europe, which constitutes a little less than 1 billion. Manufacturing is not more than about 20% of their total population. So the question that we all should be paying attention to is, where is manufacturing going in these countries? Very little manufacturing is happening in advanced capitalist countries. Most manufacturing have moved to other developing economies or emerging economies or newly emerging economies. Examples include Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, India itself, Honduras, Costa Rica, you name them. While almost 70% of North American economy, its workforce participates in the tertiary and the quaternary sector. And the quaternary sector is where the demand is for very high skilled, flexible skilled workforce that is willing to replicate its skills constantly and very fast. Even as I talk about all this, and some of these ideas will continue to come back. So hold on with me and stay with me. Before I finish off, I want to quickly spend some time talking about what is the typical spatial attribute or attribute of knowledge economy. Now, Professor Poornima Singh in her introductory remarks mentioned the word globalization. The Western world is fast moving away from globalization. When we were introduced to the idea of globalization in late 80s, early 90s, when there was a large scale economic restructuring in the world, a bipolar world got converted into a unipolar world where the United States was the only superpower. That arrangement of a world is fast moving forward. It has already changed. The United States is fast losing its grip. If you pay attention to what's happening by way of the news, the United States is soon going to lose its superpower status. China, on the other hand, is moving forward. I may not be able to share everything that I need to by way of argument, but this is a global scenario right now. And the important thing that we need to understand is that when globalization started, when the bandwagon became important and popular in the early 90s, the idea was to give respect to the notion of interdependence, interactions. While those ideas are still important within a capitalist framework, today the notion of command and control has become more important, and I will be spending some time to discuss what is this idea of command and control after all. Even in India, the way our industry, the way capitalist framework in India is operating currently, it does not give me any indication of one which is moving democratically. The democratic economy that we knew of, we left it far behind. And in embracing market economy, in embracing liberalization, in embracing deregulation, privatization, we have also moved in the direction of becoming part of a system of capitalism, which is very command and control driven. I have deliberately put on this screen images of some individuals about whom you hear in the economic pages of Times of India, Hindu, Economic Times, and many other magazines. You're familiar with these faces. And these faces are the ones that are commanding and running the global capitalist system. How far they're running it in the interest of people like you and me. people in Bihar, people in Maharashtra and Punjab and Kerala and the rest of the world is a question that we can sit and discuss. My talk is not about conclusion. My talk is more about picking up the strands, picking up the trends, picking up on what's going on. In talking about spatial attributes, I want to talk about the first point, which is the promise of reversing. So, the capitalism that we saw in the West evolving throughout the 1800s, throughout the 1900s, particularly up until 1990, was more about concentration, production in one place. Major centers of production, such as New York, such as London, such as Tokyo, and their stock exchanges, they became the determining places. That's where most major decisions were being made when it comes to capitalism or spatial economy. But that model of concentration fast began to wane, and we could not stay with that. It had to move from concentration towards decentralization, because concentration was making many things more expensive than it should have been. For example, if all the headquarters of many multinational corporations were going to be concentrated in New York City, when New York City's downtown was becoming heavily expensive, that means that the products that you create, the process that you create, is also going to be expensive. So decentralization was a logical next step. Industries and their multinational headquarters or regional headquarters, they started moving away from major metropolises, major cosmopolitan cities, major world cities such as Tokyo, London, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, to many other intermediate-sized cities. Today, we are seeing the same trend in India also. Mumbai is way too expensive. Real estate is very expensive. Delhi is becoming unmanageable. The national capital region of Delhi. Kolkata, there is no space. Where are you going to grow? And similar issues are there with Chennai. It is not without reason and spatial decision-making dynamics that we find today the coming up of places like Bangalore or Bengaluru and Hyderabad and many other places, the second-tier, third-tier cities. There is a capitalist logic behind the evolution of these second and third-tier cities. The other point that knowledge economy and the command and control is doing, that it is now trying to bring the process of production and the process of creation, innovation, imagination, research and development closer to each other. And I will give you a couple of examples. Some examples from India and some examples from the West. Even as the capitalist mode of production system moves away from major metropolis to decentralized location, there are certain places that are important for it. For example, the Silicon Valley. If you are Google, if you are Yahoo, if you are a major IT company, or if you're in the world of biotechnology, you will have an address, you will have an outfit, you will have an office in the Silicon Valley. Because Silicon Valley is not just about maintaining a physical presence or maintaining a physical address. Silicon Valley is also about, as I earlier said, sharing, collaborating from others who you can benefit from. In India, a number of industries, particularly ancillary industries, are relocating around places where research and development takes place, whether it's in the area of pharmaceuticals or information technology or biotechnology. And hence you will see that similar kinds of products or processes are concentrating in one place. And this is not something new. Geographers talk about this, economic geographers talk about this and have been talking about it in terms of agglomeration. Similar kinds of goods and services will concentrate in one place. Well, it makes sense. And it makes sense because that is how you save on the cost of labor, you save on the cost of transportation, and you save on the cost of the finished goods reaching the consumers. Am I making sense to everybody? Is it okay if I hear somebody saying yes or no? Because I think like I'm talking. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You're quite audible. We have muted actually, our.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just want to make sure that
Yeah,
we're all
it's all
together.
perfectly all right.
Wonderful.
You're very good.
So the next thing that I'd like to talk about is capitalism has always created, in the past and now moving from a resource-based economy into a knowledge-based landscape, it has created a moral culture of its own. It's a different thing that this moral culture may not be ethically correct. But who cares in capitalism? You think Jeff Bezos cares, or Adani cares, or the Ambanis, or Elon Musk? They don't care if that morality is sustainable or not, whether capitalism itself is sustainable or not. Now, we all know, we've heard about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals framework, which is another framework that the whole world is being suggested, advised to use as a framework to save the planet and to move forward. But that's not the moral culture that is the ethical landscape that the capitalists today are interested. There are a lot of people who are extremely critical of such a growth that we see or that we are witnessing with our capitalist captains, some of which you see on the screen. As I'm discussing command and control, I also want to share with you that between the 1950s and the 1990s, a period of about 5 decades, or 4.5 decades rather, capitalism's nature in the Western world was one which was driven by the idea of Keynesian economy or welfare. And that welfare idea of how an economy should run was also a dominant feature in India. But post 1990, we gave up on that welfare idea and we embraced the idea of what is opposite of welfare, which is known as workfare. WORKFARE, workfare. And in this move, we also began to criticize the welfare as very secular and capable of stagnating the economy. Now, many of you perhaps who are familiar with the literature, who are familiar with, and perhaps who are aware of what I'm talking about, may come to some kind of a conclusion in terms of where I'm coming from. But I think one of the most important things that's happening in this process of moving towards knowledge-based economy, and by the way, I don't think anybody can stop this process. It's not about any individual in control. In fact, governments also are not in control. They can, but it depends upon whether they have the willingness to control. The command and control aspect of knowledge-based economy has already entered India. And it is already creating a deep gap. Economies in the Western world, barring some places in Europe, particularly Scandinavian economies, such as Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, if you are in North America, particularly in the US, economies over there are highly about the creation of a steep gap. Inequality is very high. Imagine a $25 trillion economy where only 1% is in control of that resource, and the rest of the 90% or 10% maybe maximum, and the 90% is waiting for what they can receive. That's the literal logic. But this movement from resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy, nobody can stop it. It's already happening. And it's happening as the intrinsic logic of how capitalism operates and how it survives. Of course, in all this, what is also happening is that legal institutions, of which governance is a part, other institutions in society, they are all providing it legitimacy. They have all become part of this decision-making process. They do not have the capacity to challenge it. So, what are the implications for spatial science or geographers? The other day, it was only last week on July 15 that I was talking at Patna University's Department of Geography, sharing my thoughts on the fact that The idea of geography is no longer the traditional geography that we know. Geography has moved to spatial science. What that means is two things. Geography is now becoming more interdisciplinary, and geography is moving towards embracing technology at its best, information technology at its best. And of course, geographers call that spatial or geospatial tools. Surrounded around us, we are with all kinds of needs in society. Let me talk in terms of Bihar itself. I cannot think of any department, any government in Bihar, be it planning and statistics, be it health, be it education, be it transportation, that can perhaps do decision making without considering the tools of the spatial decision making. Map and map making is a very rudimentary tool. You cannot rely on a map that was designed 2 decades back. Your data is constantly changing, people are constantly moving, which means that the dynamics of the group of people, of the demographics for which you make decisions, that is changing, which means you need a new fresh map in front of you. That's a very simple statement to make. But spatial decision making is not just limited to a simple choropleth map. It is far more than that. I was a week ago, 10 days ago, traveling to Darbhanga, Madhubani, and I had the opportunity to fly into Darbhanga and experience the aerial view of what was the flood situation there. I know that the Honorable Chief Minister, other officers in the government, they all do this exercise when needed. But spatial or geospatial technology has the capability to capture that in real time with tools and techniques. Using GIS, using remote sensing, using Google Map and Google Earth and several other tools. And of course, today, we're also using artificial intelligence and sophisticated softwares across the board, which are all becoming part of this spatial decision making. In other words, our policy decision, our evaluation process, understanding crisis or problems in a wide variety of situations are all dependent and should be utilizing spatial decision-making tools. To give you some examples of what these tools are, if you look at the screen on the right-hand side, and there are things like land management, network analysis, incident mapping, spatial measurement. I mean, that list is a long one. A number of you are perhaps today not going into a shopping mall to purchase something, but you're also ordering from Amazon. It will be interesting for you to understand that how Amazon operates, or for that matter, how any service provider on the internet is providing service to more than 1.3 billion population in this country. GIS, remote sensing, geospatial tools is in constant use in decision making, in the process of shipping. The moment you press that button on your laptop to order something from Amazon, you basically throw into action a whole series of other action. A barcode is created, a barcode that can be traced at every step until the product reaches you. That entire process is very much about GIS-based modeling or geospatial tools that are being put to use. And the most important thing that we all need to understand is as these technologies and their use are evolving and they are becoming rampant, we need new people. We need people who understand these skills, people who are smart in these skills. In other words, geospatial technologies is not just in use by the government, by the military in India, by the private sector, but also in civil society, by non-profit. We cannot do our job today without geospatial technologies. As we discuss and as we talk about all this, we have to understand the human capital and the public policy implications of knowledge economy. There are two aspects of knowledge economy or knowledge economy workforce, which is very important. On the one hand, it involves education, and on the other hand, it involves building skills. if any region, in this case Bihar, has to become competitive within India and globally, then understanding this knowledge economy landscape is very important. I think I mentioned a little earlier the word flexibility. It's very important. And I also mentioned that information technology is not the only tool that you need in this evolving landscape. There are many kinds of services that knowledge economy involves, especially in the tertiary sector, in the service sector, which are low end. But those jobs are also required in the hospitality sector. The pandemic itself has shown us that there are many kinds of jobs that survived in the pandemic. Many of us were locked up in our own homes and we could not go outside to purchase grocery. हाट बंद हो गया था, बाजार में सब्जी नहीं मिल रही थी. And such other things were happening, and the only tool that we could rely upon was our cell phones. Thank goodness. In some cases, the vegetable vendor has a cell phone. Easy to talk to them and request them to deliver what we needed home, and that was possible. Life went on as normal for many of us in big cities and in some cases in Bihar too. But the whole landscape of knowledge economy is constantly evolving. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that any tool, any technology that you learned 5 years ago on your computer through geospatial technologies, Microsoft, generally speaking, none of those tools are going to remain the same 5 years down the line. In fact, as I speak, Microsoft may be coming up with a new version. As I speak, ESRI and its GIS tools have already gone to number 11, number 12, number 13. And knowing the new version is important because everybody else is getting onto that bandwagon. So you can't be using an older version. It's like you can't use an older edition of a book because the new edition has new information. And knowing that new information is important. In all this, education and skill is important, but is also important simultaneously is that the industry and the university system, they come together, they partner to deliver this constantly evolving knowledge, the constantly evolving technology, the constantly changing geospatial technologies, which means that whatever we were teaching 5 years ago cannot be continued to be used today. We have to be willing and ready to bring in new information, new knowledge. And this is one of the very significant aspects of the changing landscape and, of course, the public policy education. So, is everything okay? Is everything okay? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Please continue.
Thank you, thank you. So, I'm almost coming to the fag end of my talk. What does all this mean for Bihar? What does it mean? And I wanted to discuss, I may have my own biases in understanding the economic realities of Bihar, the economic landscape. But on the screen you see I'm talking about backward linkages and I'm talking about forward linkages in this knowledge economy landscape. If knowledge economy is like Gandhi Maidan, there is a Western Patna and there is an Eastern Patna, which is important in it. If knowledge economy is something that we are going to introduce in the post-secondary stage, it also has a pre-secondary stage and it has a higher education aspect to it. In other words, introducing a new tool, introducing a new technology cannot happen at a certain point abruptly. We have to build a landscape for that. In other words, What we are learning in schools also has to change, also has to adapt, also has to prepare for how we want to evolve in this new knowledge landscape. In other words, knowledge economy landscape has to become the motto of the government if it wants to move and if it wants to adapt to where the world is moving today. Now, some of us in Bihar appreciate this. In fact, many appreciate this. Many understand this. I will refuse to believe that people who are in positions of leadership do not understand this. They all understand. And I say this because I know that they all travel. They travel to Delhi, they travel abroad. And when they travel abroad, they get exposed to what they see there. So it's not that people don't know. Everybody knows this. So the backward and the forward linkage and understanding and appreciating this linkage and making sure that our policy prescriptions, the policy bullet points involves the pre-secondary and also the higher education in an evolving fashion is very important. Of course, for the government, there can be issues of funding, of motivation, of, whether they are inspired to do this. But for our youth, for our younger folks, for those who are entering the employment market, into the labor market, for these individuals, for the young ones, if they want to survive in the market that is evolving, not just in local Bihar, but in India and outside India, it is important that they understand that these skill sets, these evolving skill sets, and the ability to solve problems will determine the price that they are going to ask for. What I mean by this is that if you are looking for a certain salary, a certain wage, it will be directly proportional to the skills that you command. As a geographer today, whatever I learned in graduate school back in the days is not enough. If I don't constantly train myself, if I don't constantly learn and keep updating my knowledge base, I will not survive. People will not read what I write, and people will not listen to what I have to say. Experiential learning is very important in all this. The opposite of experiential learning is rote memorization. The traditional ways of learning are no longer valid. The traditional ways of learning was good for a certain period. I know of several people, those who were my contemporary, my seniors, and many juniors who moved out of Bihar, who went to Delhi, who went abroad. They all complain that we are very good theoretically, but we were never taught how to do what is called problem solving. And in this knowledge-based landscape, experiential learning and the ability to solve problems is one major issue, an attitude that we can all develop and learn to survive in the marketplace. Because the technology is going to change fast. But the question is, your employer is going to ask you, do you have the ability to solve the problem, to learn a new tool, and to move forward and be beneficial for us? Because if you are not constantly learning, and if you're not learning the new tools, you're no longer valuable to your employer. Whether your employer is a government, whether your employer is in the private sector, or everywhere in between. In this framework, universities today are, of course, they have to keep up with the Jonases. Their curriculum have to constantly keep changing. And so, to Dr. Poornima Singh, I will urge that one curriculum meeting once in 6 months may not be enough. You might have to revisit the curriculum. And this may be across the board, and if it's already happening, wonderful. The other aspect is the idea of a tradition. A lot of learning is also happening outside the formal university system. We all have heard about MOOC, M-O-O-C, online learning on a massive scale. We've heard about how there are many other bodies, associations, trade associations, which are providing certification in a wide variety of areas. In the area of spatial science itself, ESRI gives free knowledge. All you have to do is use your email and log in and receive newsletters and information. And there's a lot of learning that can happen free. I said this last week in my conversation at Patna University, and I repeat, we have to become intelligent users of the internet. The internet has good characteristics, the internet has negative characteristics. And it is for us to make our choice on how we are going to use this huge portal. Finally, a couple of things in terms of challenges and opportunities for Bihar. In terms of challenges, I see population dynamics as a very, very challenging aspect. And there are a couple of things happening within population dynamics. Bihar is also, while being for the amount of land that we have and resource that we have, its population is fast shifting, moving. Because of the structural reasons, when people could not find employment and a certain quality of life and a certain wage, they started leaving for other places. It could be to work in the national capital region, Delhi, it could be in Kolkata, it could be in Mumbai, it could be in the farms of Punjab, in Haryana, in western Uttar Pradesh, who knows. But one of the questions that I asked myself when I got off the airport at Darbhanga 10 days ago is, where is people's ability to pay for the airfare? That means people have 10,000 rupees as part of their pocket expense to spend in flying. That's a lot of money. Sometimes I have to think several times before I can think about unplanned expenditure of 10,000 rupees. But that means people have the purchasing capacity. Where is this purchasing capacity coming from? We have not created enough employment perhaps, and yet people have the purchasing capacity. And the word that I'm going to use now is that a large part of that demographic is surviving on what is known as remittance economy or money order economy. A lot of our significant talent is lost to other places within India and outside India. Professor Poornima Singh is aware of this, and so I'm sure my geographer colleagues and students, you all are exposed to information. When we are losing active population, the fundamental question that we should ask is, what is it that we are doing is structurally wrong, that we are not able to retain? And it does not mean that I'm criticizing the government. The government, I'm pretty sure, is doing its level best. Not to forget that the institution of caste has played a dominant role in decision-making processes, which does not go hand in hand with knowledge-based economic landscape. It was okay in a knowledge-based, in a resource-based landscape, but not in a knowledge-based. In a knowledge-based system, you either know something, you are either willing to learn and become part of the new growth process, or you will fizzle out. Also, the perpetuation and the reproduction of many semi-feudal social structure becomes a hindrance. However, even while these challenges are there are opportunities. I think our people, our human capital is very resilient. It is willing to understand the writings on the wall and what is being told on the horizon and the directions that the world is moving in to adapt itself. We also have a wonderful ancient legacy. We are the state that had, universities such as Nalanda, far ahead of its time. To talk about more contemporary things in terms of opportunities, we need to think a little bit more spatially. Think about tax incentives. Think about creating a special economic zone. And of of course, all of this, if the idea is to attract human capital-based institutions or research and development or IT-based industry in Bihar, we have to provide the right environment, which is political stability. When all of this will happen, the facilitation of knowledge-based economy will itself move in a very, very accelerated fashion. With that, I'm going to end my talk. And I thank you for being a wonderful audience. I need to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, sir.
Awesome.
Now we are starting our question and answer session. If anyone is having any question or any discussion, they can discuss with sir. Anyone? Is there anyone?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, Swati, do you have a question?
Sir, I would like to ask you a question. Don't you have
Could you be a little louder, please?
about hello? Hello. Am I
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, sir. Do you have a question about that remittance-based purchasing power that a person can purchase and take care of airfare and all that stuff?
Kanchan, can you repeat the question again if you heard it, or somebody?
Swati, your voice
I was not able to get.
breaking. Swati, your voice.
Just a
Yeah.
minute, sir.
Please, please repeat the question.
Maybe she can just write down her question. That would be better because it is not clear. Maybe she can write down her question.
And that might be a good idea. Please put it on the chat, and it'll be easy for me to read. And while that question is coming up, anybody else?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to your wonderful lecture.
Thank
and
you.
It was really thought-provoking and quite insightful. In the end, part of your lecture, you said some traditional institutions like castes and caste-based inequalities are important reasons for important hindrances so far as economic development is concerned. And it is absolutely true. And I would just add one more element. That is, in past few, India is of course a multi-religious and multilingual society, but the role of inter-community tensions and tensions along linguistic and lines are also, I think, important hindrances so far as economic development is concerned.
Well, in a dynamic society like ours, which has a history of more than 5,000 years, it is not unusual to expect these kind of hindrances. We in spite of these hindrances, we are a functioning democracy. These challenges have to be overcome by people. We've done many things in the past. We achieved freedom in 1947. It was a national coming together of people. The emergency happened, good, bad, ugly, it happened. post-emergency, lots of political scenarios and the landscape have changed. People have participated. I was at Delhi University when the emergency Mandal Commission happened. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that hindrances can be overcome by the participation of the subaltern. The subaltern has to ask questions. The subaltern has to demand a certain route into which they think that they want their country, their society, their district, their state to fall into. So I mean, in other words, yes, these challenges are there, but raising your hand and lifting up and giving up on it is not the way. One has to raise questions. Every society faces a wide variety of protest. American society did, European society did, Africa, Latin America, and many others. So the point that I'm trying to make is that, people have to be alert. I see there is a question, and let me take this up. Swati's question, I don't know if it is still coming. And that's
it is Swati's question only.
This is Swati's question. Okay, let me read it out. Swati's question says, you have mentioned about the remittance economy and also purchasing power of the people of Bihar, but don't the awareness and opportunities also needed to catalyze the process of formulating knowledge-based economy apart from purchasing power? Let me understand your question. Remittance economy and also purchasing power of the people. Well, so I'll try to answer, or I'll try to make a comment, even though I don't think I fully understood what was at the back of your mind. But when I was talking about remittance economy, I'm not, there is no data in front of us that tells us, and there is no way to collect such data to understand what percentage of Bihar's population has moved out of Bihar, whether it is people who've moved abroad or people who've gone to the rest of the country. But there is a sufficiently large number of people who are relying on services, on their needs, whether education, training, employment. Everybody moves outside. I mean, you only have to stand at a railway station or at the airport in Patna, and maybe at the railway station and airport in other cities in the country to understand and to do a first-hand data collection to understand what number of people have moved out. And I'm pretty sure that that number is very high. We're not talking about 1%, 2%. I myself am a living example of somebody who's outside Bihar. And I know so many who are outside. So the point is to understand the trend. The point is to understand the direction. And all of us who are earning a wage or salary or making money somewhere are sending some part of that earning back to Bihar. It could be that we are sending it to our parents. It could be that we are sending it to our family. We are investing in assets. We are buying land. We are doing so many other things. So what I'm trying to say is that the purchasing capacity is not necessarily getting generated by any major economic activity happening within Bihar. It's not because of an employment that was created within Bihar in large numbers. So how is that dependence on external remittance over a long period of time going to work out? This is a very big issue to be thought about. I don't think this is something to be worried about, but something to contemplate upon as we consider the demands of knowledge-based economy. I'm not sure if I may have answered, but I tried my level best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I, on behalf of the center, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the Honorable Speaker, Dr. Rajiv R. Thakur, who took out valuable time of his busy schedule. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for the speaker for his explanation on the topic. We are all inspired by his great words. I would like to thank Professor Sarfaraz Alam from BHU. I would also like to thank all our guest scholars and invitees for joining our webinar. Finally, I would like to thank our director, Professor Poornima Shekhar Singh, for her enthusiastic support in organizing such web-based lecture series in the Center for Geographical Studies, Patna. Thank you.